I was there, and it got quiet, and then Eddie Cox said, and Brother Kenny's going to lead the next song. And it turns out there's no other Brother Kenny, and I did. But I told Eddie I'm going to call him up for surprise preaching at some point. This Sunday, yeah, I guess that's true. All right. Hey, we're not going to go through everything on here, but if you do not get the one call now that goes out, make sure that you get in touch with our church office, and Laura can get that to you. And you can have all the prayer requests, the bulletins that go out, and the announcements that go out. Just a couple things that I do have to let you know about. Boyd's Scholarship Dinner is coming up on the 25th of February. And if you need tickets, you can see Chuck Lipford. He hasn't been here the last couple weeks because he was in the hospital yesterday. A little bit of temporary paralysis in one of his legs that they're trying to figure out. And went through x-ray and all kinds of stuff and found nothing. And so be in prayer for him. He is back home now, but if you want to sign up for tickets, you can, why don't you just come see me, and I will go see Chuck, and we can get that taken care of. So if you want those, let me know. The bereavement group that goes on is, next meeting is February 21st. And as you can see, as you walk in the auditorium tonight, we have a lot of soup. Right, so thank you all for bringing soup for Super Bowl Sunday. We don't have a count for how many. We had a goal of 500 cans, and what you see out there is not all that we have. We already took some into the pantry, so it's never too late to bring soup. And but thank you so much for what you've already done. There are some prayer requests on there. Dan Collins is in rehab right now after he fell. He had a hip surgery. Not right now. They're asking for no visitors. But his room number is on there, and he'd love receiving some cards. Kayla O'Neill's dad is having a hip replacement, and Peggy Saylor's friend Dorothy is at home now. We've been praying for Dorothy, and she is recovering from her surgery. So we got a lot to talk about tonight. We're in Judges again, but I want to start by go ahead and just praying over what we're going to do, praying for our prayer requests. And as usual, if you've got some prayer requests that you'd like for the church to be praying about, just email the church office, and Laura will make sure that gets in there. That's the safest way to get it to Laura, not to me, to Laura. She is very efficient. I can be forgetful. So let's send those right to her. All right, let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, we love you so much. You're an awesome God. And I'm thankful, God, for our church family here and how much you continue to just embody all of us with your Spirit. And God, I pray that be evident more and more every single day. God, I thank you for just the gift of a body of believers. They get to be our family. They get to be our home as we're waiting to come to our ultimate home. So God, today as we study about you, help us to really be focused on that's what we're studying. We're not studying about us. The stories that we read about in Judges are about you. So God, I pray that you just help us to know more about you, to surrender more to you, and just in everything that we do to give absolute glory to you. So God, as we leave here a little bit later, I pray that our lives can be consistent with our beliefs. And God, that we are just fully surrendered to who you are, that we are willing to act on your commandments and to live according to your word. So God, all those that we have here who are sick, those who are stated and those who are not, I just pray that your healing be all over them. And God, we know that you have the power to do absolutely anything. But God, we also want to be completely in your will. And sometimes we don't know how those two things intersect and work together. But God, all we want to tell you tonight is we trust you. We love you so much, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Book of Judges tonight. Go ahead and open up to Judges. I just have this weird feeling that you all want to be really quiet tonight, and I'm not going to let that happen. All right. Let me get over there too. All right. We're going to be in Judges chapter 6 tonight. But as usual, let me just remind you of one of the main reasons why we are looking at Judges is one of the verses in chapter 2 that is quite possibly one of the saddest scriptures in all of Scripture. I think it rivals when Noah was around. I think that's Genesis chapter 6, where it says that God regretted or was filled with regret for creating mankind. That's a pretty sad statement. But here in Judges chapter 2, verse 10, we get this statement, this verse, that all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. And I know I keep not correcting that slide. Every time I move it over into the next presentation, it says the word and not work, but we know what it says. But I'll fix that for next week. But that's a sad statement. You know, a whole generation not knowing about the Lord, especially when he had done so much for them. I mean, from the point of bringing them out of exile in Egypt to just walking with them, providing for them in the exile. And I mean, you just keep on moving through everything that God had done and everything he had provided for them. And to think that there would be a point where a generation just stops teaching the next generation. You know, I don't want to stretch commentary on that by any means, but I do just want to reiterate, this is why it's so important that we teach our children, not just here at church, but when we go home. It is so important that we teach our children. It's so important for those of you who don't have children to invest in children. And there's so many different ways you can do that. It doesn't always just have to be here. I mean, it could be at the camp. It can be over at the school in so many different ways. Our sojourners will get this chance to spend some time over at the school. And I was just trying to encourage them Monday that while they're there doing work, you never know what a kind word will mean to a student. I want to brag on somebody just real quick, and I hope, well, he's not in here to embarrass him, but, you know, I've got a 6-year-old son, and he loves to play basketball. I'm not bragging on my son. He's not all that great at basketball, but for his age, he's not bad. But he loves to play basketball, and he looks up to anybody who plays basketball. And some of y'all have met Thomas and Brandy. Brandy's over here. But they have a son in high school, Evan. He's over probably in the youth group room tonight. But they live in our neighborhood, and Noble just loves Evan. And Evan is just so kind and noble. And he comes and he helps me coach Noble, well, the whole team, but he's there coaching Noble and Luke and those guys. And today was twin day at school. Like, you're supposed to find somebody to dress like. And last night, Evan texted me and said, hey, well, you think Noble will want to dress alike? He said Noble got to go to school and he was just beaming because this high school kid who plays basketball wanted to be his friend. And he'll do it all the time. He'll text me and say, hey, Noble want to come down and play basketball? And he doesn't know it, except I told him today. He doesn't know what an impact that has on a 6-year-old kid. And that influence, and I know Evan, he'll do this, and probably already is, the influence that he can have just with friendship like that. Man, if he wanted to be a mentor for Noble spiritually, he's already there. And so, I mean, no matter how old you are, how young you are, man, to invest in the next generation is an incredible, incredible opportunity that we have. I know sometimes it's, let's just be honest, kids can be annoying. Amen? I'm just kidding. Look, we're an honest church here, right? But adults can be annoying too. But, you know, kids can sometimes, you know, they do all kinds of stuff, whatever, but at the very end of things, what they need is older people who are willing to get down on their level and talk to them about real things. Right? And when I mean that, like, it's incredible how much an impact on a little kid and even a little bit older kid, when a person older than them stops them and doesn't chastise them, and sometimes they need it, and that's okay. But it won't mean as much unless you're also the person who steps aside and says, hey, I've been praying for you this week, if you were actually praying for them this week. Or to say, hey, I just want you to know I saw something you did that was really cool, and I just want to tell you I'm proud of you. You know, whatever it might be, those things shape our young people. Those things allow them to want to be invested in things like faith. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about. But it's our responsibility as parents, but as a church as a whole, to make sure this next generation knows about faith. And that's not just through talking to them about it. It's through showing them what it's like to live through faith as well. So that verse there, Judges chapter 2, verse 10, is kind of the verse that gives the reason why Judges ever happened. Is because they didn't teach the next generation about the Lord, so they fell into this same cycle over and over and over again. They do evil against the Lord. They turn their back on the Lord. There's a time of punishment and testing of the people of Israel. They then get to the point after years sometimes where they cry out to God because they can't fix it on their own. And once they cry out to God, God provides a judge and peace. And guess what they end up doing after a time of peace? Sometimes they have 20 years of peace. Sometimes they have 80 years of peace. But they get so comfortable, what do they end up doing again? Evil in the eyes of the Lord. Evil in the eyes of the Lord. Evil in the eyes of the Lord. Turns out that's not just an Israelite problem, is it? Sorry, that's just a cute baby over there. But she's just so cute, I can't even think. But let's look at Judges chapter 6. I didn't mean that like take your baby away. That's not what I mean. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Judges chapter 6. Let's read a few verses. Let's read the first 10 verses together of Judges chapter 6. It's going to kind of set the stage for the next judge that is to come. This judge that we're about to talk about is one of my favorites in all of the book of Judges for multiple reasons, and we're not going to try to rush through his story. We're going to get through about half of it tonight. And even if we end up ending early, I'm dedicated to not trying to rush through Gideon's story, all right? Because it's so rich and it's a little bit longer than some of the other judges' stories. But let's see why Gideon is needed. Chapter 6, verse 1. Here's that verse. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. All right, so if you look at that verse right above that, how long had they just been experiencing a time of peace? 40 years, right? So 40 years of peace, and then after 40 years of peace, under Deborah, the judge, they go back and do what is evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian for 7 more years. So 7 years of this oppression. But I really want to read this because I want you to see how bad the oppression is on God's people at this point. All right, so let's see what the Midianites are doing to Israel. Verse 2 says, "And the hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves the dens that are in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. For whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. They would encamp against them and devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, and no sheep or ox or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents. They would come like locusts in number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they laid waste the land as they came in. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the people of Israel cried out for help to the Lord. And when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord on account of the Midianites, the Lord sent a prophet to the people of Israel, and he said to them, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. And I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you. and drove them out before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you have not obeyed my voice. All right? So in one word, what has been the cause for all the oppression of God's people at this point? Sin, disobedience. Absolutely. Was God very clear with what he wanted from his people? All right. Is God still pretty clear with what he wants from his people? Yeah, he definitely is. Do God's people still choose to disobey, even though we know exactly what he wants from us? We do over and over and over again. So should we expect anything different than what the Israelites get? We talked about it a little bit last week. I know it's kind of a touchy subject. Does God still punish people or allow people to go through that time of punishment because of disobedience? So you tell the story here, just so we all know it together. What was the extent of the oppression that the Midianites were taking upon Israel? What is described there? What's happening? They're taking their crops, right? And they're getting it so bad that where do the Israelites have to take up residence now? They were digging caves in the side of the mountains, right? They no longer could be out in the open, but they had to be in places where they could hide away. That's how bad the oppression was going on for 7 years. And you had the Midianites and was it the Amalekites or the Amalekites? And they would come in as soon as the Israelites planted their crops. And what would they do? They would just swoop right in and take all of the harvest away. And not only the harvest of the crops, but, I mean, it also says that not only was there nothing left, but there was also, where did it say? They left no sustenance in Israel and no sheep or ox or donkey. All right? So you think about an agricultural society, and if you take away the sheep, the ox, and the donkey, what do you have left? Those Israelite chickens. I don't know, maybe. That's true. But, I mean, you take away the ox, you take away the ability to farm. I mean, the ox was the instrument used to plow, to do all those things. I'm not sure what the sheep did or the donkeys, but donkeys are pretty scary dudes as well. They protect as well. Donkeys really do. But you take away those things, and you take away the ability to live. Right? If you take away the crops, what do you have left? I mean, so I want you to picture Israel at this point. They're not just, going through times where people don't like them. Their very ability to survive is being threatened right now. I mean, we kind of gloss over it sometimes, but words like this, that their sustenance was taken away. Like the ability to feed themselves and nurture themselves is just absolutely wiped away by the Midianites. Oppression and persecution gets bad in Judges, but this from the Midianites might just be one of the worst that you see. I mean, I try to get a full picture of what's happening here, but imagine as these are Israelites, all the people, if this is men, women, and children, and babies, imagine being in the place where you are wanting to feed your family, but someone else comes in and takes all of your food away. I mean, if even in your house, listen, we suffered when you couldn't get toilet paper at the store. You know what I mean? Or when eggs are expensive. They just didn't have food. Right? People just came in and just took it. Like if somebody came into your fridge and just said, "Oh, this is mine now." Well, I wouldn't recommend doing that in Florida. That maybe wouldn't go over too well with some people, but you would fight for your food. You wouldn't necessarily build a cave and hide away. But we see the oppression is so bad, and we'll see it because in this next part where Gideon is actually introduced, we'll see what he ends up doing. But with the persecution, the oppression that was going on, when the people of God cried out to God, when the Israelites cried out to God, what was his response? Yep. So a similar pattern that he does with a lot of, he did this with the Israelites as they were leaving Egypt in that time of wilderness wandering. He tells them to remember what he had been doing for them. Remember how good I have been to you. He takes them through the Exodus story, right? I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians. And he just keeps going with that. Now, he says, look, I gave you something to do as well. I provided for you. I asked for you to obey me. But that sad statement at the end there, but you have not obeyed my voice. All right, so who were the people obeying if they weren't obeying the voice of God? We know who they were worshiping, but we know where their allegiances were lying. But what, in essence, who were they pleasing? I mean, Satan, basically, but even through the avenue of doing whatever was pleasing to themselves. And those things aren't too much different there. And these people are at a point of self-gratification rather than God gratification. And when I think about terms like that, I mean, to compare what they are doing to our society today, where, I mean, we focus on ourselves so much. I mean, I'm not saying these are all bad things, but most of what's out there in even counseling and stuff like that is you, like, take care of you, take care of you, take care of you. And listen, I think you should be healthy, all right? I'm not saying anything against that. But to focus only on you all the time, you are going to end up gratifying something other than God. And there are times where I have to gratify God, and it doesn't always feel that good to me. You know what I mean? Where obedience is not always what I would choose, because it doesn't make sense, right? Or it's hard to do. And that's those times where I have to make that decision. Am I going to gratify me, or am I going to gratify or obey the Lord? So let's look at what Gideon is up to at this point, as he is becoming or getting ready to become a judge. First of all, we know a few things about Gideon. He is, well, let's just read it. I don't know. No, I even have that slide up there tonight.
Kenny,
Yes, sir.
before you go to that, he says he sent them a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
Was that Gideon, or was it some other unnamed prophet?
I think it's an unnamed prophet.
Seems to be.
It seems to be, just because of where you find Gideon.
He was introduced after that.
Yeah, and the state in which you find Gideon, he seems surprised about what God is doing.
He's resisting.
Yeah, a little bit.
Looking for signs, some proof.
Yeah. So my default would think that that's an unnamed prophet that was there. I wouldn't necessarily assume that it was Gideon. And it's a little bit different because in Deborah's story, she was the prophetess and the judge. But I believe that in this, that the prophet that was sent wasn't just an unnamed prophet.
You know, to me, the time of the judges was probably the darkest days of Israel's history, as I read it.
Yeah.
And in the closing verse of Judges, the statement is made, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
Yep.
And this goes back to the idea that just whatever pleases them.
Yep.
You decide what's right or wrong, and you just do it. And of course, you are going to naturally be inclined to think whatever feels good to me is what is good.
Yep. And that's exactly what they were doing. And this, of course, man, Vernon, you're skipping all the way to the last verse.
Yes,
But
the last verse of Judges.
all right, but you know that, of course, we'll see that Judges is setting up for the time of the kings, where the people demand a king because all the other nations have a king, but the king wasn't the fix, was it?
No.
Because you see him still.
So I think this is a description of the days of the judges.
Right.
That's the way I look at it.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. The doing what is right in your own eyes. What I have learned, Vernon, is when I read verses like that, I used to get really, really down on God's people. But I have to step aside sometimes and understand that I can relate with them some. You know what I mean? And I don't want to always relate to them in that. But there are times where if we're not careful, our default can be, I'm going to do this or say this or whatever it might be because it seems right to me. And we have got to be better at asking the question, what does God want? Or even how does this glorify God, rather than does this feel right? And you see stuff. For me, it comes out in relationships a lot, where how I could respond to somebody might be what I feel is right, or what I think is right, or whatever it might be. But in the very basics, I'm still choosing and doing exactly what Judges is saying here, that I'm choosing to do right in my own eyes without considering what would God have me do in this situation. Now, I'd love to be at the default place where I'm just always doing what God would want, but there's always that battle of flesh and spirit. But you're right, this is quite possibly one of the darkest times in all of Israel's history. I mean, not only have they not taught the next generation, but they are just doing whatever they want to do. And that leads to a lot of pain for a lot of people. It definitely does. I'm thankful that he sent them judges, but I wish they would have listened. So let's look at Gideon real quick. Let's just read the verses 1 through 18 together. It says, "Now the angel of the Lord came, excuse me, and sat down under the terebinth at not Oprah. That can't be Oprah. Let's say Ophrah, which belonged to Joash, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites." All right, let's stop there for a moment. What is Gideon doing at this time? He's threshing wheat, but not where you'd usually find him, right? Where is he doing that? In the winepress. Why is he doing that? Because his family's got to eat, right? And so he knows that the Midianites are going to be coming through probably. And so we get some indication the Israelites are falling into self-preservation, which is natural to do. But there's also a lot of fear going on with Gideon right here. So you find him beating out wheat in the winepress, so he's hiding it from the Midianites. And then Gideon gets a special visitor in verse 12. It says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, 'The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor.'" He seems like a mighty man of valor at that point, right? He's hiding and afraid. And the angel of the Lord calls him, "O mighty man of valor." And Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened to us?" Do we ever see questions like that today? Where is God in all this? If he loved us, why would he let this happen? These questions that people ask today are not different than what they were asking in the times of Israel as well. He says, "And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us to the hand of Midian." And the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" All right. I find this very humorous with Gideon. "And he said to him, 'Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house.' And the Lord said to him, 'But I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man.' And he said to him, 'If now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you.' And he said, 'I will stay until you return.'" All right. Let's look for a moment at Gideon and who he really is. He's found hiding from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord calls him a mighty man of valor. And then he describes himself as pretty much the weakest man of all of Israel. Can you imagine that man at that time being called this thing by the angel of the Lord? He says, I'm from Manasseh, and my clan is the weakest of all the clans of Manasseh. And not only that, but I am the least in my father's house. So he has pretty much just said to the angel of the Lord, you have got to find somebody different for this job, because he just assumes you must be looking for a different guy. I am the weakest. Barry?
I noticed something that I don't know that I've ever noticed before.
Mm-hmm.
Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened to us? Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? I'm sorry, I've lost it.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, he says, what happened? Our fathers told us all these great things,
Mm-hmm.
and where are they now? So part of the fault apparently lies on the current generation, not so much as the fact that the older generation didn't pass on the accounts because he knew about them.
Mm-hmm.
They knew how to get a hold of God.
Sure.
They cried out to God saying, come save us. You did all this stuff in the past. But apparently some of the younger generation must have kind of blown it off as stories or, myths or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know, but at least at some point, those recounts of history were passed down.
Yeah. And we see, I didn't do the calculation with since Judges started, how many years we're now at, with the times of suffering, the times of peace. We're probably from Judges chapter 2, we're probably at a different generation now. And so they were reminded, and they probably started teaching again. But you're right, I mean, how people receive the teaching, though, is different all around. You have Gideon here, there's indication that at least somebody is teaching, the things of God. But now he's using that teaching to say, well, if that's what you did, where are you? Where are you now? We've heard these things, but let's see it be real. Like it was a story that we heard, but hey, look where we are right now. Right? But yeah, we do get indication that somebody's at least teaching now. But with Gideon, he said he kind of has a struggle with his identity, and we'll talk about that in a second. We'll just talk about it now. There's a difference in Gideon with what he calls himself and what God calls him. You see that big difference there, right? What does Gideon call himself? Weak, pretty much the weakest. And the angel of the Lord shows up and immediately calls him what? A mighty man of valor, right? A mighty man of valor. And not only does he call him a mighty man of valor, he then goes in again after Gideon is kind of doubting a little bit and struggling with his identity and who he is. He goes in and says, well, use this might of yours to go and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do I not send you? So this is one of the earlier indications that God always chooses the ones who are most powerful and most mighty, right? Yeah, not often. Not often. Samson, pretty tough guy. But that came from a covenant that was made very young for him. But a guy like Gideon is different. I can't relate to Samson. I can't. But I feel Gideon sometimes. I mean, how often do we get so wrapped up in the weaknesses that we think we have that we forget how much God can do with absolutely anybody? I mean, this came as an excuse for Gideon, similar to what Moses did, right? Remember what Moses did? What were the excuses Moses gave? I've got a stutter. I don't know how to speak. You might want to get somebody different. I mean, he just goes through it, right? Excuses that he should not be the one to do this. But does Moses end up doing great things through God? Yeah? I mean, fast forward a little bit. You have, we'll get there at some point. Not in this study, but you go to David's story, right? And even the anointing of the king, when he was young, was he even considered at first? He wasn't. I mean, he was the youngest, and when the prophet walked in, he saw all the other brothers and like, yeah, that's the one right there. Yeah, he put the tallest, most handsome one, the one that seemed most like a king, and none of those were the right one, but the humble shepherd boy that came in was the one. You take the apostles who were chosen, right? You choose a tax collector. All right, and the implications of being a tax collector and a Jew at the same time, social, he would have been an outcast to choose to work for Rome rather than to work, pretty much against his own people. You take fishermen. Like, there would have been better choices, right? But does God always work in the logical way when He's picking who to use? I mean, at one point he used donkey, right, with Balaam. Look at Numbers. He used a donkey. All right, if he can use a donkey, he can use anybody. But I just want to be really clear. I phrased that right. He could even use Ron Brackett if he chose to use a donkey. Miss Sharon?
What he was talking about, Gideon, he says, if the Lord is with us, why all this happening? And where are all the wonders that our father told us about? Did the Lord bring us out of Egypt, but now the Lord has abandoned us? I hear people, and I do it sometimes myself, but I say, why would God do this?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense. I'm not accepting my responsibility.
Right.
Because, he says, and you put us in the hands of Midianites.
Mm-hmm.
They're disobedience. There are consequences.
Yeah.
And that's what they failed to see. And then the Lord turns to him and he says, go in strength because I'm one with you.
Yeah.
But we do become weak and cast blame.
Yep. We certainly do.
God for doing things that are just consequences for decisions
Yep.
that we made.
Yep. We absolutely do. Miss Mary Lou, did you have a?
It said, go in your strength.
Mm.
And he considered himself the weakest of his family, and he's not that strong. But two, it tells you that he doesn't have faith that was God talking to him because he said,
Show me a sign.
show me a sign.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we, even though we believe in God and we say we have faith, sometimes we don't express it clearly.
Yeah. There are times where I want to say, show me a sign. Put out the fleece. We'll get there in a second. But if this is what's supposed to happen, let me really, really know it. And that's why I say with Gideon, it's easy for us to look and fault Gideon for how he responds here. But we are really not all that different than a Gideon. One thing I think is really neat in this is, let me be clear, I never have seen this here, but we had one elder down in Orlando who people would always bring him, they'd always bring the elders ideas. Like, hey, this would be a great ministry to start. We should really do this. And great hearts. And his brother Tony Washington, his response would always be, that is a good idea. Do it. But they would come, a lot of people would come, hey, this would be a great thing. Let's find somebody to do this. Or, somebody should really do this. But his response was a lot like the angel's response here. Yeah, it is good. Do it. And I think that's really a great thing that we could just maybe step back a little bit. Like, we can all see deficits. Like, that's easy for people to see. Like, man, this should really be happening over here. Or, man, here's a group of people in Eustis that need help. And whatever it might be, somebody should really do something. Right? And a lot of times in churches, if we're not careful, we can get into that mindset. Somebody should really do something. Right? Somebody should really save Israel right now. And that's what Gideon's saying. We've heard that you can do this. Why are we in this situation? Right? He's probably heard of judges of the past, so he's probably saying, hey, somebody should really do this job of saving us again. And God, the angel of the Lord, his response is what? Go do it. Now, was Gideon qualified to save Israel? He sure didn't think he was. Yeah. Yep. Was David able to fight a giant? Only with the Lord, right? And you look at all these different things. Would Paul, without the Lord, would the known world know about the gospel of Jesus? No. You take, anybody without the Lord and the work doesn't get done, but he still uses people. Still uses people. And we'll move on from that point here, but just want to make sure that we understand this, that Gideon knew one thing about himself, but God knew something much different about him. And I would think in this room tonight, there are probably some of us who think a lot lower of ourselves, but when paired with the power of God, you never, ever understand what can be accomplished. Right? On your own, yeah, you might not be enough, but with God's help, you'll be more than enough. Right? And so just, I read Gideon's response, and I think automatically to a lot of my teenagers of the past. Like I'm just one person. Like I'm going into school, and I'm just one person in this place, right? Or how can a teenager make a difference? Or you might feel that when you go to work or wherever you are, in your own family. How can I make a difference? I'm just this. I'm just this, or I'm just this. And I just want to at least encourage you a little bit to say, hey, you're not just anything. That's not who you are. We talked about it not too long ago on Sunday mornings, the difference in 1 Peter of what the people used to be versus what they are. They were people without a belonging, without a people, all those different things he said, but now you're a chosen race, you're a holy people, you're a royal nation. So when God is in the picture, no matter what you think you are or are not, he can do incredible things anyways. And we'll see it here with Gideon. Let's move on in there, verses 19 and following. It says, so Gideon went into his house and prepared a young goat and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and the broth he put in a pot. And he brought them to him under the terebinth and presented them. And the angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on this rock and pour the broth over them. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of his staff and that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes. And fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. And then Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. So he asked for a sign, right? He got a sign, and so he starts to believe. Right? That's great. So he perceived that for sure this was an angel of the Lord. And Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace be to you. Do not fear, you shall not die. Why was he afraid of dying? Because anyone who sees the face of the Lord will surely die. He knew the word. He knew what was written. And he says, hey, I've seen the face of the Lord. And God says, peace be to you. Don't fear, you're not going to die. And then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it the Lord is Peace. To this day it stands at Ophrah, which belongs to those people. All right. That night the Lord said to him, take your father's bowl and the second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of the stronghold, here with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down. So Gideon took 9 men of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night. All right, is he doing great things already? He certainly is. Is he still got a little bit of fear issue that's going on there? He certainly does. All right, Gideon's a man. He's a person, right? And just like you would be, when he is asked to do things like he's being asked to do, he's got questions, right? He's asked for a sign. It's not going to be the last time he asks for a sign. but he gets that proof, and that gives him at least a little bit of courage to obey now. So what's the first task that Gideon's asked to do? So apparently at his father's own house, there's idol worship going on. All right. So what gods are being worshipped at Gideon's father's house? The Baal and the Asherah, right? And there's idols that are there. And what is Gideon told to go and do? He says, take your father's bowl and another one, and what are you going to do with those? You tie that bowl up, and you hook that rope over to those idols, and you tear those things down. And not only do you tear it down, but what you're going to do now is you're going to take that next bowl that you had, and that wood from the Asherah that is there, you're going to use that to sacrifice an offering to me. That's pretty cool, right? Take that idol, and that's going to be the wood that you burn your sacrifice to the Lord with. Does Gideon obey? Yes, he does. He does what he's told, but he does it in a little bit of fear, and he does it by night rather than by day. And I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. He did obey. I'm not sure if God was expecting more of a spectacle about it, but guess what? When you wake up in the morning and you find the gods that you worship torn down, people are going to find out no matter what. And you get that happening here in the next section of verses. And we're just going to cover up through chapter 6 tonight. We won't go into chapter 7. It says, when the men of the town rose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was broken down, and the Asherah beside it was cut down, and the second bull was offered on the altar that had been built. And they said to one another, who has done this thing? And after they had searched and inquired, they said, well, Gideon did. I'm not sure how they got to that point. But they did their sleuthing, and they found out that it was Gideon who did it. Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. And then the men of the town said to Joash, this is Gideon's dad, bring out your son that he may die. For he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah beside it. But Joash said to all who stood against him. Now he's a good dad right here. Right? He says, will you contend for Baal, or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down. Therefore on that day Gideon was called Jerubbaal. That is to say, let Baal contend against him, because he broke down his altar. So what's his dad say in essence? Yeah, Gideon has taken down this idol, this altar to Baal, but isn't Baal a god? Why don't we just let him take care of it, right? Why don't we just let him take care of himself? Probably a little bit of defense against his son, but it's a really profound statement, right? If he's going to, why do you need to fight for him? Why do you need to kill my son? If he did something all that bad to another god, let that god deal with him himself. Now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east came together, and they crossed the Jordan and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon. Probably the most important sentence in all of Gideon's story. That he wasn't now doing this on his own, but he was doing it clothed by the Spirit of the Lord. And he sounded the trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called out to follow him, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him. He sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they all went up to meet him. So let's finish up chapter 6 real quick. It says, then Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, I'm going to need another sign. All right? This is kind of a cool one that he does, but just understand the mind of Gideon right now. Has he seen great things from God already? Yeah. Has he been protected by God already? He absolutely has. He's already done things. He's already obeyed, and he's already seen that God will take care of him. But it's like that next step. He's like, all right, I just need one more. I just need one more. Because what he's being asked to do at this point is the biggest thing he's ever been asked to do. And I don't want to fault him for this. Like, I might be wrong. We'll read it here in a second. But I don't ever see God saying, Gideon, stop asking for signs and just go. But he gives him the sign. He really does. So let's see what he does. Gideon said, if you'll save Israel by my hand, as you said, behold, I'm laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. So he goes in at night. He sets the fleece out. Now, what happens in the mornings on the ground? What forms on the ground usually? The morning dew, right? So what's his first sign that he asks? He says, well, I take this fleece and I put it out, and it is covered with that morning dew, but the rest of the ground is dry. Then I'll believe. Now, I don't know how he came up with that, but it sounds like it's just a thing that wouldn't happen unless it was God doing it. And so he did that. And verse 38 says, and it was so. When he rose early next morning and squeezed the fleece, he wrung out enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. But that wasn't enough. Gideon went to God a little bit sheepishly this time. He said, all right, don't let your anger burn against me. Let me just speak one more time. Please, let me just test once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece, and on all the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece only, and on all the ground there was dew. So he just did the opposite now. All right. So a lot going on here. We're going to finish up Gideon's story next week, but just a couple of things to at least think about in these last 5 minutes, or just a couple questions here. All right. We already talked about that first one a lot, but just this idea of what's the difference between how you see yourself and how God sees you. All right. I don't know about everybody in the room, but I do know that a lot of people don't understand who they are. If you were to walk on any high school campus now and ask any kid, well, they might not even talk to you, but ask a kid to describe their gifts, their talents, or who they are, or anything good about themselves, I bet you'll find more kids who can't tell you anything good about themselves. And part of that's not their own fault. Sometimes they're never told anything good about themselves. And so what that leads them into is never telling themselves or recognizing anything good in themselves. And I'm not talking about, like, I know we're all sinful by nature. I'm not talking about that there, but their abilities and their giftedness and their talents, because no one ever talks to them about this. I did this a couple of years ago at the MDCA campus, where anytime I was on campus, I made a point to find one of the students and give them a real, genuine compliment. Right? I remember one girl, it was at the Nathan Hayes tournament. The bakers were serving food, and I popped in to do a Devo for a couple of teams, and there was a young lady that was serving, and I just told her, I said, you know what, it is so good that you took so much time out of your schedule to come and serve people. I said, that's a really awesome thing that you're doing, and I just want you to know, and I knew her, I just said, I want you to know I'm just really proud of you for doing that. And she couldn't even look me in the eyes. It was so weird for her to hear a compliment. And I thought, this just must be an anomaly. I went to the basketball game that night, and there was a kid there that it was from Eustis High School. I think we were playing Eustis that night, and they were getting rowdy. And I was sitting up top with Carolyn and Cletus. So it might have not been that tournament. It might have been the other one. But I was sitting up top with Cletus and Carolyn, and there was a group of young people from Eustis that were over on the side of us. And you know, it's cool to yell and get rowdy at the games, but what they were yelling was not okay. And this is not really in my nature, and I wouldn't have done this if Bethany was with me, because she would have said, no. So it was okay. I mean, she's more wise than I am. I probably shouldn't have said anything to the young man, but as he got up to go to the concession stand, I said, hey, come here a second. And you could see it in his eyes. He's like, oh, great. And I saw in his eyes like he was either going to just not come up there to talk to me, or he was getting ready for a fight. And I just stopped him. And I was like, let's experiment a little bit here. And I didn't say that to him, but I thought that. And I said, hey, what's your name? He told me his name. And I said, hey, I just want you to know, I really appreciate your team spirit. I said, well, and he looked at me like, wait, that's a little bit weird. I said, no, you are so passionate about your team that you're out here, you came over here to cheer on. And I said, well, you could probably do it a little different. But the fact that you care about your team like this, that's pretty cool. But, you know, you got a lot of kids around you. Let's maybe clean it up just a little bit. And he looked at me like, what? But you know what he did? Cleaned it up. He cleaned it up. There's a lot of power in being positive with people. But seeing young people not know how to take a compliment and to not expect something good is an indicator of where we are, right? And I would imagine that even in a group of people, there are times where we can spend time in our own minds and in our own selves, and man, we talk ourselves down so much. I'm the weakest, I'm the worst, I'm this, and what we need to understand is this, that God's with us. Last thing I'll tell you is this, there's a phrase that's been plaguing me. It's not a Bible phrase, but it's just coming out of different situations I've been in and working with other people in. But here's what I'm getting, and it's just happening here with Gideon again. Gideon was operating out of how he felt, not out of what he knew. All right? And I get that way when I'm with God. Sometimes I operate out of how I feel and not out of my conviction. And that's a dangerous place to get. And I just want to encourage you a little bit with Gideon's story, and then we'll be out of here. Just a phrase that I have written down in my office, and it's here right now, is act on conviction, not feeling. And so, man, when God asks you to do something, do it. Do it. It's always better if you just do it. I can be like Gideon all the time. I can think, well, maybe I'm not the right person to do this, or maybe there's somebody better, or I'm the weakest, or I'm this or that, or I will do it once I have a sign, those kinds of things. But when God asks you to do something, just do it. Act on conviction and not on your feeling. Your feelings are fleeting, but when God asks you to do something, it is always better when we just act. All right, Gideon's going to get there. He's going to get there. He has his struggles. He needs his signs. But in the very end, he acts. All right, he gets put in one of the toughest situations that any of the judges get put in. And we're going to see it next week. You probably already know the story, but if not, we'll go over it next week. We're facing a giant army, and God just whittles down his defense, his fighters. And it's really cool to see. But let's come back next week and see how good God is and how much he cares and provides for his people. I hope you all have a good rest of your week. And as usual, it's just always so good to be with you guys.